morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Patrick Flynn, and welcome to this morning's A Different Perspective. I am so excited you are here with me today on this beautiful first weekend of 2020. Was it January 4th today? First of all, I'm so excited to cover this topic and start the year off right. And our topic is based on a challenge that we started just about a month ago. And we started to actually perform it about the first of the year. And that's when we did a no sugar January. Well, so our big topic today is actually sugar. We're going to cover it in great detail today. But here's the thing that happened. So I actually have been working on this presentation all week long. Actually, I was gone live, and we have a private page. If you're not on the page, it's called No Sugar January. It's a private Facebook page. We have some communication back. We share some things. We share recipes, over that. And then, obviously, I've been putting together the whole presentation as like I do most of the week. And then all of a sudden, yesterday, I was pretty much done with most of my presentation. Maybe just had a little bit of ideas here and there. And then the one thing that I always like to do is I always like to see what's out there. So having our No Sugar January page, I did something I shouldn't have done last night. We had an amazing Christmas party with the Wellness Way and our local team from both Green Bay and Appleton offices. And had a great time. I left at my normal time to be able to come home and lay down and go to sleep and get ready for you guys. I like to get here, in the morning and prepare. And then all of a sudden, guess what happened? I did the unthinkable. I actually jumped on the No Sugar page to read some of the comments that we probably had over 1,000 that day, and just what people are going through. And it was interesting because I was going through all the comments, and I'm like, and it was quite entertaining, to tell you the truth, because you would be surprised how many people are talking about this, and then you had people sometimes get downright angry and make comments on there about this and this, and then I watched their comments, and I'm like, I don't know where they're drawing their conclusion from. Vice versa, there are some things that were really good. And so all of a sudden, I laid down, and no joke, I started to go through my presentation in my head a little bit, so what I was going to talk to you guys about today. And then all of a sudden, guess what happened? I was like, man, the concept of sugar is so not only misleading, but actually misunderstood. And so I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna go to sleep. I got a great presentation presented for them. I'll start there. I got some great detail, things like that. And all of a sudden, I had a dream last night about sugar. And I woke up and I startled, and it was 2:15 in the morning. And I think I finally fell asleep at about 11 o'clock. It was 2:15 in the morning, and I woke up, and I literally woke up because of a bad dream, because somebody was giving bad information about sugar. And so here it's 2:15 in the morning, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I have to change everything. So I literally got up at 2:15, jumped in the shower, got ready, put my clothes on, went downstairs, got my stuff, and I headed here to the office. And lo and behold, there was an ice storm. So it was very slippery for all of us getting in here this morning. But all of a sudden, I'm daydreaming. Just telling my funny story. I'm daydreaming as I'm driving, and all of a sudden, it's glare ice. And I'm coming to the stop sign, and all of a sudden, it was kind of funny, and I start sliding. And I slide through the stop sign, and I'm heading right for the ditch, and all of a sudden I turn the wheel, I hit the gas, and thank God. And thank God it was, 2:45, 3 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, because I was consumed by my thoughts. I would have made the stop sign if it wouldn't have been so icy. But then all of a sudden I'm like, oh my goodness. And my first thought that I had after I started driving was, man, I'm so thankful I didn't crash. Otherwise, there's no way I could have rewrote my whole talk for today if I would have crashed. Now, not if I was doing okay or not my heart was going 100 miles an hour. Telling you that kind of my morning, kind of a dumb story, to tell you the truth, because I was reading the comments, and I came here and I went through and obsessed reading the comments, and I was like, oh my goodness, what the concept of sugar is actually hugely misled from all the different diets, from all the different weight loss things, from, it's been demonized, it's been not been demonized, the massive opinions about it, people hold dear, and I watch good people fight. I watch good people And I about give their, take their stance on it. I'm like going, and some people are downright mean about it on the page. I'm like, well, I'd kind of delete those comments, but I'm like going, where did they get this information? So I took my presentation I had, and actually I totally wiped it out. No joke. So it's 3:30 in the morning. I'm sitting here in Green Bay, and I'm like, I have to represent and rewrite what I want to do. Because why? Because what I had presented to you guys today for sugar was actually some pretty good detail about some of the things, and then certain foods and things like that. But then I realized that I need to start back at a really basic level, because I was so surprised what people don't know about sugar. What we consider second nature, and kind of to us more on a simplistic realm. I was surprised that people don't understand sugar's role in the body. And then you hear things, especially with all the different diets out there, about, ketosis and your brain doesn't need sugar and things like that. I clinically don't know where they get that from. I do not, because it actually makes no biological sense whatsoever. But then it's so huge today because everybody's looking for weight loss. And then they've pretty much, demonized sugar from that standpoint. So I'm like, okay, let me start from the beginning. And so I have a question for you guys. So instead of actually giving you information, I'm going to pose the question at the beginning, and I'm going to pose the question at the end. And I want to see, for example, your answer, if it changes. I'm hoping to give you a different perspective, because as you know, everything that we look at, what we do, I'm always trying to come at it from the standpoint of the human anatomy, from the physiology, from biochemistry. So when I present the question for you, do me a favor. I literally want you to say out loud, yes or no. And here's my question for you. It's quite simple. Is sugar bad for you? Just simply, yes or no. See, so what I want you to do is take a second, think about it, and give me an answer. Now, you don't have to put it in the comments. If you want to put it in the comments, please do. But you don't have to. But put it in the comments to see what we have going on. And also, if you do make a comment in there, let me see if I change your mind or if it's exactly what you just keep it the same. But on top of it, I'm hoping to give you some insight to actually maybe, if you think a certain way, to give you a little different perspective. Because here's what happens. Why is there so much confusion? Because we've all seen these things. You can go on basically any advertisement and say, there's good and bad carbs. And guess what? The processed sugar is bad. Now, wait. Honey, it creates diabetes. But no. Honey, it's one of the most beneficial raw foods on the planet. And then you have people fighting from both sides. And I'm like, can you answer more detail on those things? And most people can't. So everybody's standing around clinically going, I'm confused. I don't know what to do. What is it, doc? So that's why, by having the No Sugar January page, it's allowed me to get some insight from you guys. That's why I constantly love feedback. Because I was reading all the comments, and just before I went to bed, I was going, wow, what a misunderstood topic. And that's why I had to rewrite it. I want to actually start right from the beginning of it so people can have a greater understanding of it. Now, that being said, I want to go into the great detail of the topic as far as what I had even presented for today originally before I showed up and rewrote everything. But what we're going to do, our media team, I literally texted our media team. I texted Aaron and Brandon, I think it was at 3:45 in the morning? And I said, did you put out the advertisements for next week's topic yet? And they're like, nope, we're going to do that today or later tomorrow. And I'm like, don't, because here's what we're going to do. For the next 3 weeks, so today, next Saturday, and the Saturday after that, we're going to do sugar 1, 2, and 3. So let me tell you this, sugar 1, 2, and 3. Because not only am I hoping to get a great foundation for you today to have a greater understanding of it, to be able to answer that question, is sugar bad for you? It's also to actually give you the great details, so now the actions that you can take that will lead to your lifestyle when it comes to sugar, to give you the greatest health benefit there is. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm not going to have some decent detail today. I'm not just going to give you a big concept. I'm going to give you great action steps that you can do literally as soon as we're done with this show, that can actually make your life better when it comes to sugar. So now, Where do we start? Well, the one thing that I've always learned when it comes to, basic healthcare things, you always have to define your terms. And when it comes to the term sugar, here's what I want you to get. This is the greatest concept that changed my life when it came to hormones. Sugar is a general term like estrogen is a general term. What do I mean? Here, for some of you guys that may be the first time you ever watch me, or you guys may have watched my stuff a ton of times, I always tell people, if you want to really, start to get some thought going on in most people, especially women, ask them how many estrogens they have. Ask them if estrogen is a hormone. If I were to ask you guys, once again, the majority of you say, would know this answer if you followed me for a while, is estrogen a hormone? Well, most people that never heard me talk would say yes. And I'm going to say, no, it's not. Estrogen is not a term. Estrogen is not a hormone. Estrogen is just a term that actually represents multiple hormones. Well, the term sugar is the same thing. It's a general term. It represents a bunch of molecules. And that's what's kind of cool. So if you look at it this way, even how they define sugar is actually pretty generic, just by that term. It's a generic term that describes any of the classes of soluble crystalline, typically sweet-tasting carbohydrates obtained from plant sources and other living organisms. Now, the majority of sweeteners that we actually enjoy come from basic plant sources. But guess what? You can actually get sugars from bacterial sources, animal sources. They exist in basically everything that exists on this planet. And that right alone should be like, okay, listen, it's more than just, once again, one thing. And the reason I want you to get that is because when people just generalize, here, let me give you an example. This has been demonized massively, and that's why the topic I'm going to cover after this is after I do sugar 1, 2, and 3, I'm actually going to cover estrogen itself. Because once again, it's very demonized. Estrogen is demonized as, doc, that's why if you look at most women that have suffered from breast cancer and wearing the pink ribbon, they are on some form of estrogen blocker. They're in some form of aromatase inhibitor to stop the production of estrogen because estrogens cause cancer. And I'm like going, that's not true. That's not true at all. High level of certain estrogens or even low level of certain estrogens can contribute, actually one of the greatest contributors to breast cancer. But estrogen itself does not cause cancer because once again, estrogen is a general term, and therefore if you actually have high levels of one estrogen or even low levels of another estrogen, that can actually develop cancer. So it's not even about having high estrogens. So when they're trying to block estrogens, they're doing what? They're actually inhibiting some of the estrogens that actually protect you against breast cancer. It's the same thing when it comes to sugar. They generalize everything, so guess what happens? Most people actually only know the current form of sugars that we currently take right now. And people will literally get downright mad. I've seen people say, I see people, when we created the list for the No Sugar January, I've seen people that actually, I'm sorry, but sometimes it's hard to be nice. I see some of the people comment on that page, and I just sit there and shake my head and go, they're clueless, okay? And the reason I'm saying clueless instead of ignorant means you just don't know. Clueless is they don't know, but then they want to act like they do. Do you see what I'm saying? Sometimes they just need to button their lip and learn. And that's the purpose why I'm like, man, I gotta start basic with that. So let's look at this. What are the most basic forms of actual sugar, okay? If we look at this, here we go. The types. So let's start with the most basic and abundant types. They're called simple sugars. They're also called monosaccharides. Mono being one. There's just one, all right? And there's three forms of the just one. There's glucose, by far the most abundant. There's fructose and galactose. If you look, they're all chemically very similar. They're very soluble, they're very sweet. And once again, we're going to go into some of the details about the most abundant one, which is glucose. Now, when you see these things, people realize these represent sugars. So when people say, Doc, sugar is bad for you, I'll say, which one? And they'll say, Doc, sugar is good for you. I'll say, which one? See, that's the detail that I was like, oh my goodness, most people don't know. And then they say this. They say, well, processed sugar. Well, guess what? Believe it or not, each one of them, if you don't understand, or if you eat them in the inappropriate times or during certain times of your life, can be very detrimental for you. But on the flip side, if eaten at certain times and eaten at certain times of life, yes, it does matter. It sounds funny, but the timing when you eat sugar, but also your age, is actually dependent on that. See, so that's why the generalization of everything actually drives me nuts. So I want to get into a little detail about probably the most known, because a lot of people have heard of glucose. Some people have heard of fructose, because actually that's a fruit sugar. Now, Durham, am I going to list today the content of fructose in the fruit sugars? Originally, that was my plan. But I got to get the general concept in these things across. We'll probably cover that next week about what are the highest glucose, fructose, and galactose-based foods. That will be at our next one. See, because I was going to go into great detail until I realized that going, oh my goodness, we got to stay a little bit more of the global picture of this before we get into that detail. So now, let's look at glucose. All right? Glucose. It's the most important source of energy in all organisms. In all organisms. Bacteria, funguses, animals, plants, us. See, if you look, and that's where, for example, when I look at the people say that you don't need glucose for energy, you can use ketones. That is not true. Biologically, that makes absolutely no sense. Every organism on the planet is actually dependent on glucose, by far. So if anybody going forward tells you that you are better off burning ketones compared to sugar, I'm going to ask them which sugar. And they won't tell you, because once again, you're going to see there's multiple forms of sugar, and I'm going to explain all of them today. But the idea is this: it's like glucose is the most important source of energy in all organisms. It's based. Actually, it's kind of funny. Do you know how you produce glucose? It's pretty simple. You have water, and you have oxygen, and you have carbon, and you have sunlight. That's how it's produced. It's one of the major structure backbones for all carbohydrates. See, because a sugar is just a form of a carbohydrate. And that's why people say, well, there's good carbohydrates and bad carbohydrates. That's not really true. Okay? They make the mistake on that. I'm going to go in detail on that. Now, here we go. It's the most abundant monosaccharide. By far. It dominates. Do you understand that the majority of our plant sources are a combination of all glucose? That's just what I said. Plant sources. Doc, so you're telling me that a green plant, that spinach, actually has glucose in it? Yes, it does. And I'll show you why people don't understand that. Nerve cells, cells of the renal medulla, part of the kidney, and erythrocytes, the red blood cells, depend on glucose for their energy production. Now think about that. See, that's why when people say, well, your brain doesn't need sugar, that's not true. It's actually the most abundant thing that uses glucose. Do you understand that your brain and your nervous system use more glucose than any part of the body? Here, get this. Do you understand if you get too low of blood sugar, actually blood glucose, do you understand, do you know what the end result is? A coma. Do you know that if you get too much glucose, do you know what the end result is? A coma. See, your body is so dependent on its regulation, it's crazy. Glucose is actually the key to people actually going in and out of comas. They'll actually, no joke, they actually do it for IV purposes. They'll do it, they have tablet forms that way, that people that have actually went into hypoglycemic comas because their glucose to their brain drops so significantly. So glucose is a major aspect of nerves, kidney, and red blood cells. Well, I bring that up again because think about this. If you have blood sugar regulation problems, let's call that diabetes, type 1, type 2, or metabolic syndrome, what's one of the major symptoms that comes with it? Nerve pain, neuropathy. That's why if you look at most diabetics, they suffer from a lot of neuropathy because there is problems with regulating the blood sugars for the nerves. What else? Kidneys. What happens when you can't properly exchange glucose within a kidney? You can actually end up on dialysis. You actually end up with a very, very bad kidneys, and you can have a dialysis. But third of all, erythrocytes, red blood cells. There's one of the major labs that we absolutely love is hemoglobin A1C. Because once again, there's changes in these three things majorly that happens when sugar, for example, is not understood or done properly. So now, what else? In combination with other monosaccharides, they make cell receptors, tissues, and membranes. Hold the phone. They make cell receptors, tissues, and membranes. Example, joints. Now, one of the things that you will notice before I put up my next slide, if you are on the sugar page, the No Sugar January page, do you know that one of the major things that people have posted on there in the first couple days, if they had pain, does anybody know where their number one area of pain was? Their joints. Their joints. I'll show you why, once again, why sometimes you have a headache. There's two major reasons. Once again, your body has a lack of sugar, and second of all, what happens is toxicity. But the idea is this. It's really one reason why that a couple people have even private messaged me and even said this, Doc, I got up this morning and my knees didn't hurt. I got up and my ankles weren't as sore, they weren't as puffy. I could walk better just by changing their sugar consumption that way. So, but here's the funny part. You say, Doc, but wait, you're telling me that glucose can be affected receptors, tissue cells, membranes, joints? Yes. Have you guys ever heard of this substance, glucosamine? Heck, if you've had any kind of joint problems, and a lot of our docs are chiropractors. Well, what happens is, get adjusted to rebuild the joint, you'll give them a supplement called glucosamine. Do you know what glucosamine actually is? Watch this. So we pulled it off Mayo Clinic. Glucosamine is a natural compound found in cartilage. I hate that they call it a natural compound. I absolutely despise that. They don't properly define it. So the sad part is people don't get the concept of what it is. They actually think it's some form of collagen or some form of tissue that comes from some protein or thing. It's not true at all. In supplement form, glucosamine is harvested from different shells, but guess what? There's multiple forms of glucosamine. Once again, you got glucosamine hydrochloride, you got N-acetylglucosamine, and if you look at what these things are defined as, it's quite simple. N-acetylglucosamine is an amide derived from what? Monosaccharide glucose. So I want to teach you this, guys, and I'm going to get a little bit more detail as we go on. But your joints, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them made from sugar. So if you don't put the proper forms of sugar, or if you cause sugar breakdown improperly, yes, if you cause sugar breakdown improperly, you can actually destroy your joints. You can actually destroy your joints. You can actually you can destroy cell receptors. You can destroy cell membranes. It's actually quite significant that you know that that's why some of the biggest changes that when a person has pain, I tell them, you got to back off on the kind of glucose that you are consuming. We got to actually change this. And just by doing that, their joint pain can actually change dramatically. There's a lot of people right now that are blaming their chiropractor that their adjustments aren't working because they're consuming sugar all the time. I've always said this. I've always said, anybody that actually, the majority of the chiropractic profession is this. You have pain, we'll adjust you, it'll go away, here's your bad x-ray, we're gonna change it. Do you understand that the majority of you guys, even here to this day, actually suffer from some joint pain, not because you don't get adjusted, it's because, once again, your sugar levels are off. Your glucose levels are not right. But that's not the only tissue that it majorly affects. Like I said before, if you look, cell membranes, that means every cell of the body, from brain to your big toe, to your kidney, to your liver, the receptors in parts of the cell membrane are actually sugars, long-term sugar chains. Okay, so I'm always curious to see, and I think you're getting more towards my answer, is sugar bad for you? Well, what's really the biggest part about this is understanding it the most. Now, the one thing about sugar, well, how much sugar do we actually have in our bloodstream? Well, here, in adults, there's about 18 grams of glucose, of which 4 grams are present in the blood. Now, we have about 5 liters of blood is how much glucose, so how much glucose we have in our blood at one time. Does anybody have a guess? Everybody do me a favor. in the comments below, we have roughly 5 liters of blood. And we have a certain amount of glucose in our body, but how much glucose do we have in our bloodstream at any time? Let me see if you guys can actually get the answer. Let me pop on here real quick and see if these guys are going to post the answer here. Here we go. Ah. All right. Ooh, some good answers, all right. Yes, get this. At any time, the normal amount of glucose that you have in your blood at one time is actually a little less than a teaspoon. Now I want you to think about this. Just think about a soda itself. A soda itself has such a large amount of sugar within our system that when we drink it, it absorbs extremely, extremely quickly. And the sad part is this, is now our bloodstream can spike up with sugar. And remember, if the blood sugar waves either high or low, it's going to be a bad day. So the idea, once again, this is one thing that's quite key. And all of a sudden, I'm like, my goodness. So honestly, that's when I started to have a light bulb moment. I started to go, here is the biggest problem with sugar. It's not that we eat it, because it's essential for all aspects of life. Now, it's not an essential nutrient. Now, what do I mean by that? See, there are essential fatty acids, which means we cannot make them. We need to eat them. And I've heard some confusing things said, but it's actually, I want to clear us up. When you look at sugars, the reason why they're not essential is because we can actually make them from a lot of things. We can make them from our own tissues, we can make them from fatty acids, we can actually make them from proteins. It's why some of you guys, once again, will notice and lose some muscle if you don't have enough sugar. That's why you ever notice that weightlifters and people that exercise a lot, they can actually lose muscle tissue itself because it can break down muscle tissue and actually produce it so we actually can regulate our blood sugar. That's why if you don't fast properly, what'll happen is people say, Doc, I actually lost weight, but I still have a bunch of fat. And I'm like, yeah, you gotta be careful, because if you don't know how to metabolize that sugar, if you don't know how to break it down, it's gonna metabolize your muscle to get sugar. And those are the big things. And that's what I really talked about a lot with my first talk that I had for you guys originally today. I was talking a lot about sugar metabolism and how it works. So I'm like going, well, before we can get this, we have to have a greater understanding of more things than just sugar itself. For example, glucose is not the only sugar. Neither is fructose, neither is galactose. Those are just the simple sugars that have one little component. But now there's other types, all right? They're called compound sugars, also called disaccharides, 2 sugars. So what happens is this. You basically have, as you know, you have glucose, you have fructose, and galactose. So the only difference between a simple sugar, a monosaccharide, and a disaccharide is both of them are together. Now, let me give you an example. And the molecule is composed of 2 monosaccharides joined by a bond. Now, sucrose, that's the most common sugar that we know, because that's where you get that. You can get that from beets, you can get that from sugarcane. It's actually, what happens is this. It's actually what they call table sugar, or the most consumed white sugar that we have, because these are the things that manufacturers make. Because what happens is this. When you look at glucose and the monosaccharides, the simple sugars, those are actually derived from the breakdown of more of the longer chain sugars. Now, if you notice, here's what happens. You have sucrose, which is glucose and fructose, so it's a combination. Now remember, imagine, fructose is actually even more sweet than glucose. Glucose is more abundant, but can you imagine combining glucose and fructose together? That's what table sugar is. That's why it's so highly addictive, because once again, we actually have those receptors in our brain that the minute that we eat that, we feel pleasure about it. We release dopamine. Now, the one thing about fructose though, fructose and glucose actually digest very differently. They actually enter the body in very different pathways. And that's a big thing that we gotta know to understand this. Second of all, we have lactose. Lactose is galactose and glucose. Lactose is actually a milk sugar. Now, the last stat that I read, now I'm going to give some basic stats on this. The last stat that I read was the fact that roughly 50 to 70%, I know, I'm giving that wide range because that's why, for example, I'm giving such a wide range because I've read so many research papers on this. I've seen scientists say 50% of people. I've seen people say 70%. I haven't seen much lower. I haven't seen much higher, but the average about 50 to 70% actually don't have the enzyme lactase to break this down. Now, once again, it's why some people don't handle dairy. It's why some people actually start to become allergic to dairy on a regular basis. It's why some people can actually, eat dairy and get a lot of mucus production, because your immune system has to deal with it because you don't have the enzymes to break it down. Because I know a lot of people freak out and they're like, milk has sugar in. Well, I would say, what form of sugar? And once again, that's where people stop. That's why, believe it or not, if you don't have the enzyme actually to break down sugar, once again, the galactose and glucose don't separate. And that's why some people will get irritated in the GI, but their blood sugar won't change. And there's some of you that can actually eat dairy and do what? Break it down and it can raise your blood sugar. See, that's the individuality. That's the complication when people try to generalize and say, dairy's bad, sugar's bad, all these things are bad. I'm like going, if we look at just the amount of population, yes, with a statistic like 50 to 70% of people may not have the enzyme lactase, we can overall generally probably say that the majority of people could probably stay away from dairy and do better. Okay, because if you don't break it down, it goes in the small, large intestine, and now your body and bacteria have to deal with it. So therefore, guess what? There could be a little irritation. So those are the kind of things we got to watch for. Now, the last disaccharide here is actually called maltose, malt sugar. It's just glucose and glucose. That's how you produce malt liquor and everything. So it's just actually 2 molecules of glucose. See, so if you look, disaccharides are just what? They're just actually monosaccharides combined. That's all they are. So sucrose, there we go, glucose and fructose. Once again, there's sucrose, there's lactose, there's maltose. They're just a different form of that one little molecule actually put together. That's all it is. Now, each one of these have a specific function in the body. Like I said, that's why when people say, Doc, sugar's bad for you. Well, which one? And at what time? And is there certain circumstances that dictate that maybe fructose is actually bad for you, but glucose is not? Let me give you an example. And I want to go over this just because I used it at the beginning. Because we're going to go into this next time, but I'll give you a little prelude to next week. Fructose actually, once again, is actually isn't affected by insulin. So what it does, it's metabolized in the liver. So if you have any form of fatty liver, so if you've been diagnosed with fatty liver or cirrhosis or anything, guess what happens? You can't have honey. Now, some me team just looked at me and said, Doc, but honey. And see, this happens. This is where all the honey guys start freaking out. They start freaking out going, honey, it has great bacteria. Wait. Relax. Listen to what I'm saying. If you have a major liver problem, just understand that fructose is only metabolized in the liver. It's not broken down or conformed anywhere else. At least glucose can be. So if you have honey, that's why if you ever notice, I had a patient one time that was just did their own bees, okay? Because what they say, no doc, it's a processed honey. No. See, Durham, processing makes everything worse. Let me say that again just to even blanket this statement. Anytime that you process something, you change all the bonds. Just like when you cook something, you change the bonds, it changes the nutrients that way. But I'm not talking about processed sugars at all today. I'm just talking about the healthiest forms on the planet. So I had a patient one time that had fatty liver, and he came in, this was a long time ago, and he raised his own bees. And not only was it emotional difficult for me to say this, I said, man, you can't touch your own honey. No, doc, you understand. I do it perfectly. There is no, I don't heat it, I don't do anything. I basically take it from honeycomb, look, in the jar, there's even honeycomb in there. I'm like, yeah, but your liver doesn't really like it too much. And that's why you can't convert things. And that's why you have other healthcare problems. Why your gallbladder is bad. That's why that's why you can't clear things out. Because you had a liver problem, and now you actually put more stress on your liver by eating raw, organic, non-heated, non-processed honey, because the amount of fructose in honey is higher. Now, you say, Doc, but fructose is a fruit sugar. You're right. You're right. So there's some people on this podcast right now, on this show right now that shouldn't be eating fruit, even if you're not allergic to it, even if you actually, don't have an allergy to it, because there's certain parts of your body that metabolize these sugars. And if there's a problem with those organ systems, you can take the greatest forms, the best organic forms, and it can be a bad day for you. See, that's the point I want to get across. I watched on our No Sugar January, people fight back and forth. I had one person say, honey's the greatest sweetener there ever is. You don't need anything else besides honey. I'm like, okay, so you probably read some good things about honey. You probably read some good things, for example, the amount of bacteria in there. You probably read some, I don't disagree with all those facts. But the last time I checked, I've never seen two individuals exactly the same. The last time I checked, you could tell me that honey does absolutely amazing for you. But if I were to give the guy who had honeybees more honey, it would have continued to perpetuate his liver issue. And no joke, we did back off on his honey. We did back off on also all of his fruit sugars to actually help his liver change that way. And it was significant. Okay, so just understand that. I'm not talking about processed sugars. We're going to talk about that. Actually, I think, no joke, I don't even think we're going to talk about that till the third episode that way, because that's where, for example, here, let me give it prelude to episode 3. Don't eat anything processed. There we go. You say, I'm not talking about, that's what people say, sugar cane. Well, remember, sugar cane is glucose and fructose together. Okay, now there's certain foods, now here's the one thing, guys. There's certain foods that have higher glucose and lower fructose. That's where all of the glycemic index and all the insulin index came up that way. But we're not even talking about that yet. That's next episode, okay? But the one thing I want you to understand is I just want you to get the basic concept of these, because then, once again, the part I'm going to tell you next is totally going to throw you off. Because how they came to their conclusion, nobody knows. See, that's the part, and let's get into it. So we talk about monosaccharides, talk about disaccharides, but guess what? There's longer sugars. So you had 1 for mono, you had 2 for disaccharides, but there's oligosaccharides. Those are composed of 3 to 10 monosaccharides. So imagine 10 glucose molecules put together. Imagine 5 glucose and 5 other simple sugars put together. See, the longer the chain, the more monosaccharides they are. See, that's why if you look at N-acetylglucosamine, all that is a long chain sugar. But this is where the confusion comes in. And I tried over the last couple of months to find the answer for this, and nobody can give it to me. I've called biochemistry professors, I called the people that call themselves the experts in carbohydrates and sugars, but watch this. Polysaccharides contain more than 10 monosaccharide units and can have large numbers between 200 to 2,500. So imagine that. But here's the confusing part, and this is why people say bad carbs and good carbs is right here. They don't classify these as sugars, and nobody knows why. Someone just said they're not a sugar. It's not a joke. They don't classify oligosaccharides and polysaccharides as sugars, but they are carbohydrates, so that's why they say there's good carbohydrates and there's bad carbohydrates. Actually, guys, no, there isn't. There's no such thing as good and bad carbohydrates. There's no such thing as good and bad estrogens. I watch people say, Doc, there's good estrogens and bad estrogens. No, there's not. Where do you get that? I watch natural practitioners. I've watched people get up on stage and say he's a superfood expert and said, you got to get rid of all the bad estrogens and these foods, superfoods do it. I'm going, which one's bad? Which one's bad? Because, 4-hydroxyestrone, Doc, because you're a hormone expert, you know that. Well, no. 4-hydroxyestrone and estradiol are essential for life, ladies. But if it gets too high, it's going to do its job and metastasize more cells. But being elevated was bad, not the hormone itself. There is no such thing as good carbs and bad carbs. So if anybody tells you that, they have no clue about biochemistry. They have no clue about sugars. They have no clue about basic structure anatomy. Because you know why? Because what they call good and bad carbs actually make up all of your joints. See, they just don't understand how they work in the body. So you hear about good sugars and bad sugars and do this and do this. And I watch people fight back and forth, and it drives me absolutely nuts when they don't even understand the basics. And here's one of the biggest confusions. They don't understand the basics because what they did is they said, well, since they're longer chain sugars, we're just going to call them nothing. And I called up everybody like, why'd they do that? There is no chemically structural difference than one thing. They're just longer. There's just more monosaccharides. So there's good carb, bad carb. Now, here's the key. This is where I'm like, I think I get why there's so much confusion. And I'm going to give you my basic interpretation, my viewpoint of it that way. I will tell you this. The smaller they are, actually, the easier to break down. You know, if you have 2,000 monosaccharides together, it takes more enzymes and more things to break it down to actually change your blood sugar. If you eat a disaccharide compared to something that's dominated polysaccharide or oligosaccharide, you're going to need more things for the body. And so therefore, the absorption may be a little bit slower. And that's when I was like, man, you know what happens? Look at how big those things are. They could go from 10 to 2,000. It's huge. And I started to think. I said, you know something? The first key to all of this is not sugar metabolism. Because everybody's always like, Doc, how do I lose weight? Doc, how do I increase my metabolism? Doc, how do I do this? I'm like, you're asking the wrong question. You're putting the cart before the horse. On a pathway to convert from A to D, you're asking about C to D and you're forgetting all about step A. I can honestly tell you guys, if you want to see your life change when it comes to your addiction to sugar, is this. Sugar absorption. Sugar absorption. See, the reason why they say good carbs and bad carbs isn't because they're any chemically different structure. It's actually how they absorb. But here's the funny part is this. You say, Doc, but guess what? One person ate this, another person ate this, and one person gained weight, and one person didn't. You're right. Because absorption will lead to what happens in metabolism. And now, how each person metabolizes is not only set up by their absorption, but it's going to lead to each organ system to actually respond differently and affect your metabolism. So let me give you an example. Let me give you an example of absorption. They found out, it's quite simple. Here, think about this. People that actually have some form of fat with some form of carbohydrate. It doesn't matter if it's a Krispy Kreme donut and you added some fat. The absorption, the effect on the liver, the amount of fructose, the amount of glucose, the amount of maltose, all of the sugars, all the monosaccharides, all the disaccharides, were actually slowed. Absorption was actually reduced. And so the change in blood sugar, once again, that your body has to keep roughly a teaspoon in the bloodstream at one time, was much better regulated. See, over right now, because of the world we live in, no joke, it wasn't hard 100 years ago to keep your blood sugar low. Do you know why? Most people didn't have the availability of food. They really didn't. That's why if you look at people that have actually wrote some decent articles, mainly in the Paleolithic viewpoint, man, sometimes people just ate one meal a day. So it was easier to regulate the blood sugar. Sometimes, once again, how they ate determined how they absorbed. If we go back, you can even just do this right now. If you go back and you look at the things that your parents did and your grandparents did for breakfast in the morning, it wasn't oatmeal. It wasn't cereal. What was one of the major forms? Guys, what do you think one of the major forms that people ate in the morning? They ate a lot of fats. Example, an egg. If you have choline, choline, in an egg, guess what happens? The amount of absorption of any kind of thing you ate after that was dramatically reduced. Some of it wasn't even absorbed, but then it was absorbed easier, so then it didn't change your blood sugar so quickly, and then it didn't have such a high effect on the liver that, guess what? The amount of sugar storage, because once again, once you get by a teaspoon of sugar, your body has to start storing sugar. The first place it stores it is where, guys? The liver, then the muscles, then the belly, and then other parts of the body. See, that's why if you ever notice, one of the first things that clear out of your body when you actually deplete that teaspoon of blood sugar in your bloodstream is the liver. Now, we're going to get into this next week, but here's what happens. Let me give you a little prelude to this. If you eat too much fruit, okay, if you eat too much honey and something happens to your liver, fructose has to be actually metabolized for storage in the liver, because once again, it's going to change and the liver has to deal with it first. And it puts it in the form of glyceride and triglycerides. Guys, one of the easiest ways to lower your triglycerides, stop eating fructose-based foods. There's your clinical pearl. You want to drop your cholesterol. Your cholesterol is nothing more than 1/5 your triglycerides, HDL and LDL. The only influence you can have on your cholesterol levels when it comes to diet is triglycerides. Great, stop your fructose, there you go. I just saved you a ton of money going to a doctor's visit, and on top of it, if a doctor tells you to take a statin and not stop all the fructose-based foods, it should be malpractice. It should be malpractice. All the biochemistry, understand how triglycerides are produced, is so basic. And the number one contribution to actually heart disease is not cholesterol, it's actually triglycerides. Reduce your fructose, especially if you have a liver problem, because you don't have a liver problem, you actually produce much more triglycerides. So when we actually have a person that has psychotic triglycerides on their lipid panel, they don't metabolize fructose. Give you an example, the guy that owned a honeybee farm, and guys, I'm sorry if you don't like this because people are obsessed with honey. I love honey. I actually do great with honey. But the idea is this, a lot of people don't. That's why you will never see me speak in generals. Doc, give me all your top 10 sweeteners. I can't do that. If you want to go do that, just Google search that. Some natural guy is going to tell you his favorite 10 sweeteners. Because guess what? Honey, for me, for Patrick Flynn, will be on one of the top of the lists. But the guy, Gary, okay, that had a honey farm, that actually, for example, his triglycerides were skyrocketed, guess what happens? He wasn't allergic to it on his food test either. I said, no fruit, no honey, and other fructose-based foods, which I will go over next week. And guess what happened? Lo and behold, we reduced his absorption of sugars. We actually removed those things, and his triglycerides dropped like crazy. And here's what happens. And the reason why he came here was because he couldn't get his triglycerides under control under a statin drug. See, your body is going to do no matter what it has to do, even if you try to interfere with it. You can take a statin drug, try to manipulate the liver, and he couldn't metabolize, and couldn't break down, and couldn't store, and couldn't do these things with triglycerides. So they end up in his bloodstream, which would have led to heart disease. I don't disagree with that. But see, so he's so scared of heart disease. I'm like, don't be scared of heart disease. Be scared of the honey, and be scared of the fruit that you're eating all the time. He looked at me and said, what? I know. A different perspective. A different perspective. Now, it's kind of funny because can anybody tell me? He said, Doc, but you have to have a favorite oil that actually is great for slowing the absorption down. Yeah, I do have a favorite oil. I do. So I'm going to generalize this because it's something that the majority of people can actually deal with. Now, also, before I tell you though, remember this. If you're allergic to any of the foods I tell you, then guess what? You cannot do them. Doc, I watched you. You're going to tell me your favorite oil, the favorite fat, that's good. And if I'm allergic to it, can I still have it? No. Allergies dictate everything. It does. So does anybody have any guess what my favorite oil actually for it to slow down absorption is? Olive oil. Olive oil. Doc, I went over to Italy and actually I ate the bread and it didn't affect me. Yeah, I agree. Not only the fact that they don't have glycophosphates and Roundup and things like that, and their bread is a little different, but what happens is Europeans have done this for God knows ever. You're saying they actually always had oil with some form of sugar. Do you follow me in that? They always had some oil with their sugar. See, that's why, once again, if you consume a significant amount of good fats, okay, especially olive oil, guess what happens? Well, doc, hold the phone. I actually like to cook in olive oil. That's a mistake. You're not meant to cook with olive oil. Olive oil is not meant to be cooked with. Do not throw olive oil in a pan and cook an egg. You actually oxidize it too quickly, and it's not meant to handle that kind of heat. Olive oil in the raw is absolutely amazing. It is. It's actually something that should be done on a regular basis. Olive oil, by far, to me, is one of the most essential. I actually buy biological things. I actually like olive oil consumption more than any oil. But doc, you love coconut oil. Coconut oil has different properties. But you talk about consuming oil the most. Olive oil dominates. It's why, once again, you do see in certain countries that oil is a very important thing. You do have less blood sugar problems. You really do. Now, what else can do? What else can we do to slow the absorption down? Well, guess what? The impact of gut, microbials, and host glycemic control. What they found out is the fact that, here's what happens. Does anybody know, and I'm going to give it to you next week, what fructose really does for the body? Actually, if you look, you can't find much biology behind it that actually it does much for our cells. Yes, you can have some little structural components, but those are mainly glucose. You can actually have some cell membrane things, but the majority of your fructose is actually, guess what? Eaten by your bacteria in your small intestine. That's where the majority of it goes. See, when people say, doc, fruit's good for us. Well, some of the parts of the fruit are, but a lot of the fruit is actually what? Is actually good for the bacteria. If you think about it this way, there's people that have SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, that cannot actually even tolerate fruit. Why? Because they have an overgrowth and then they're feeding it. Do you see what I'm saying? And that's why if you ever see the anti-candida diet, the reason why they have success with it is because those sugars, especially fructose and even galactose, is made to feed the bacteria that you have in your GI. And now if you actually take an antibiotic, and they found out that if you take an antibiotic, your rate of sugar absorption dramatically increases. It's why they show that kids that take antibiotics young are more susceptible to type 2 diabetes than kids that are not. That's just basic biology. And I say, doc, if you look at some of the things that fruit has in it, there's different fruits. There's good fruits and bad fruits. No, there's not. There's not good fruits and bad fruits. There's different forms of sugar that, for example, are in fruits. Because here's what happens. There's fruits that have a little bit more fiber, but their sugar content's the same. They're all made of monosaccharides and disaccharides. See, that's why I kind of giggle when they say, well, there's good and bad. There's not good and bad, okay? There's actually, for example, how fast it absorbs, how fast it doesn't absorb, now relate to your body. So if you have, get this, if you have some form of antibiotic, I'm telling you right now, you need to back off on all your sugars. It doesn't matter which one it is, because you're going to end up with high absorption, and because there's only roughly a teaspoon of sugar in your blood, you now bombard your body to make a bunch of glycogen and fat and triglycerides that way, even if you're eating organic. See, I will show you why processing actually is so bad on week 3. But here's what happens. We're not even there yet. So, well, doc, then wouldn't a probiotic, wouldn't something that restores microflora actually be good to actually help this absorption decrease? Absolutely. So does anybody know the best food? See where I'm going with this, guys? I'm trying to give you all foods. Don't buy a probiotic. Trust me, we all sell them. We all have them. They're great. But what's the best food? And for you guys that are on the No Sugar January page, guess what happens? I want you to ask you this. What did you see a lot of on my plate? Once again, when I posted some of the things that I was eating, that I ate probably so far almost every night with the exception of last night because we had our party, which I did at Fish. See, one of the greatest foods, once again, to restore the flora and actually help microbial balance back to the GI is still sauerkraut. It's still sauerkraut, by far. So there you go. So you have some oil, you have some sauerkraut. Now think about this. Go back to an old German thing. What did they used to eat on a regular basis? Sauerkraut omelets. They did. So they had their bacteria, they had their fermentation, and then they had the good fatty acids that were there. Man, you want to have a good breakfast. Once again, if you eat breakfast, you don't have to. You can actually time your foods basically that way. But you want to have a good, I love this. Man, have an omelet, duck egg for me, because I can't have chicken eggs. But duck egg for me with sauerkraut, oh, man, that's delicious. Because then once again, it's going to affect things greatly. Now, I just had to throw this in here because of my history of taking care of children, because it's something that sounds gross, but actually it can change some people's lives if it's needed. And once again, just like every protocol is different per person, there's different things that may seem gross, but actually can be life-saving. Now, what am I talking about? Well, let me show you first of all the research just basically on sauerkraut. Once again, regular consumption of sauerkraut and its effects on human health. And what they did is they went through and showed not only the fact does it restore normal flora, the amount of sugar absorption decreased dramatically and actually went in at a better process, and your body had a better time regulating. It was great for type 2 diabetics and also even type 1. Now, here's something that is kind of interesting, but to us, dietary alteration of gut microbial and an impact on weight and fat mass, and it's reviewed its meta-analysis. Okay, see, what happens is this. They took 2 mice. Okay, now they did it more than just 2, but they took 2 mice. One was a skinny mouse, one was a fat mouse. What they did, it was kind of cool research. They actually took it and they took the bacteria from the fat mouse and put it into the skinny mouse. Guess what happened to the skinny mouse? Started to get fat. Okay. Then what they did is they took the culture, because they cultured the skinny rat, and they put it back into both fat rats, and guess what happened? They both got skinny. Now, I'm not saying that bacteria was the only thing, but they controlled the environment of the rats and fed them the same thing and stuff like that, because now everybody's looking at it going, well, I'm just going to do bacteria to actually slow absorption. No. Each person's different, but it's kind of cool things that they did when they started to change the microbials. It's why, guys, if you've had antibiotic use, and you have fluctuation of weight, fluctuation of blood sugar problems and things like that, your microbial might be totally off. And some people come and say, Doc, I need to lose 50 pounds, and I give them a stool test. Like, no, Doc, I want you to check my hormones. No, Doc, I want you to test my foods. No, take this test. Your history of antibiotic use, your history of things that you've been through are leading me to believe that you need a stool test. See, because here's what happens. That person that needs a stool test, compared to the person who needs a hormone test, the person who needs an allergy test, actually needs different sugars and what they should eat. But sugars are never bad. See, that's the part I want to go through. Now, here, think about this. Here's a gross one. Prolonged transfer of feces from lean mice moderate gut bacteria in what? Obese mice. They found out by fecal transplant to mice, guess what happens? They were restoring the normal flora and the mice got skinnier. Guys, children with autism have sometimes some major microbial overgrowth that they can't get under control. And fecal implants, or even taking fecal aspect by pill, has dramatically changed your life. And I know some of you guys might be grossed out by that, but it's not if you understand the thing of it that way. Because once again, once all that bacteria is changed in large intestine, and they can actually take that. There's a lot of, remember guys, there's a lot of bacteria in stool itself. It's why a lot of animals will eat their own feces. You know, there's a lot of women that get grossed out about this. Women have a baby, and then what happens is women will take their placenta, encapsulate it, and a lot of women are like, oh, that's gross. I'm like, it's not gross. Because what happens is that placenta has more hormone balance and more things for that woman than any herb I can give her. Any herb, any nutrient, any natural thing. But some people are grossed out by it because of culture. But the culture has been done for a long period of time. Now, you say, Doc, with all this stuff, what lab could we start with? Because here's what happens. Because that's one thing I want to make sure you also have a lab to understand. And here's what happened. One of our favorite ones, and Dr. Jason does an amazing job of teaching this, is actually insulin. Now, this is a 10-year-old boy. This is a 10-year-old boy that had so many things as far as antibiotics, everything. Started to gain weight, couldn't get under control. Imagine you're 10. This little boy went through some crazy things. Guess what happens? Now, this is one of Dr. Jason's patients. That's why I pulled out a 10-year-old boy. And not only did it affect him, but affect the whole family. But look at these levels. Is insulin levels. Now, what is insulin? Insulin's a hormone that's produced to help regulate your blood sugar. If all of a sudden your blood sugar jumps up beyond that teaspoon, the body releases a bunch of insulin to get it into a cell. Remember that, to get it into a cell. See, there is some misconceptions, but we're going to go over in detail in labs next Saturday. Cortisol actually regulates how much blood sugar gets into your bloodstream, but to get it out of the bloodstream into a cell is insulin. So if you have, once again, here's the insulin, 3 to 25, his at 51. So, doc, why is it raising? Well, his pancreas is working just fine, but he has insulin resistance. So his absorption, his metabolism of all these things aren't working to the point where it just can't get into the cell. So guess what has happened? Your body has to produce and store it. So this 10-year-old boy, weight was out of control. And as a family, they lost a ton of weight. Just like our January no sugar page. There's a ton of people that have already texted me and said, Doc, I'm not joking, it's day 3 and I lost 5 pounds. Doc, this. I guarantee with the thousands of people that we have doing this, we'll probably a conglomeration, there'll probably be 50, 60,000 pounds lost over the course of that month between 25 to 3,000 people doing this. See, but also look at this. I put this up here, that's why it looks a little weird, because I took 2 parts of the page. Liver enzymes were elevated. Guys, when your liver enzymes actually start to get elevated, watch your fructose intake. Let me say that again. Watch your fructose intake. Do you want me to say it again? I'm giving you guys clinical pearls that you don't need to take an herb, that you don't need to see a wellness way doc, that you don't need to see a doctor. I'm giving you those things that will start to make those changes. Because once again, if your absorption, your fructose, or you're having so much high fructose corn syrup or even normal natural fructose, your liver has to overwork. And therefore, you're going to produce as much fat as you possibly can to take the stress off that liver. So do you think since he couldn't absorb the sugars, his liver actually ended up being so much? So last thing he needs to do is bombard his liver. Now, does this child have fatty liver disease? No, he has stressed out. So guess what? You need to actually do those things. So right now, if you have blood work, doesn't have to be done by us. This is a basic lipid panel. If you actually have ALT and AST is on a CMP, not a lipid panel. If you have a CMP and a CBC done, maybe a lipid panel, if ALT and AST enzymes are elevated, cut out the fructose. So that's why you can jump on now the internet and say high fructose foods. Then guess what? You can actually start to eliminate those out of your diet. But doc, what if I have allergies and eliminate those? Yes, I get it. I get it. You're going to only be able to eat so many things. I get that. That's the struggle of being healthy. I just wish that we could just do an alternative to everything. It doesn't work that way. The body doesn't respond that way. All right? Now, a couple other things that you can do. Okay, here we go. Olive oil. Add some form of bacteria. Avoid fructose. Move sugars to noon. All right? The reason why I say move sugars to noon, because here's what happens. By nature, our cortisol levels go up in the morning. By nature, what ends up happening is you end up flooding the bloodstream full of sugar to get you going. Remember, glucose is our #1 form of energy metabolism in the body for the brain and everything. Here, guys, watch this. If you've had a cortisol rhythm test done, a circadian rhythm done, or even just a morning cortisol, what will happen is, once again, when that cortisol drops, the amount of blood sugar in your system can be dramatically reduced. So therefore, people that have low cortisol actually wake up with what? Brain fog. Brain fog. No joke. And now I don't want you to do this, but if you add some sugar substance, guess what happens? That's why people are like, oh doc, I went through and I got my Starbucks sugar-filled latte and it just perked me up. Well, of course. Your body can use any form of sugar, processed or good, to get the glucose in. But the idea is this. Most people, so ladies, listen to me on this. If you have brain fog, you have some form of sugar dysregulation, either by your cortisol, by your liver, by fructose, by something that way. You actually have some dysregulation, and it's got to be figured out. But you can actually avoid a lot of these things, because here's what happens. When you actually do this, when you actually consume more sugar at noon, what happens by nature? Your cortisol levels drop. They drop. They force it down. Because why? And by lunch, you don't need as much cortisol as you do with wake up in the morning. See, I always tell people, man, there's certain times to eat, there's certain times to exercise, there's certain times to do this, but people are not taught that. They're just taught, do what you want, and if there's a problem, it's probably a genetic problem. Do you understand? Makes no sense. There's basic biological clocks that we do have. There's basic biology and physiology and biochemical things we all follow. That's why, believe it or not, it's actually good to skip breakfast for most people. Now, if you have high cortisol, you might not want to skip breakfast. See, but that's German based on your labs. That's why the model is we don't guess, we test. Because when we test these things, we can have a better idea of what you need. Okay? Now, what else? Get your insulin tested. That's a big key. Now, there's other markers that we'd like to see. We'll go into the full panel by the end of the 3 times that way. But here's what happens. At least that's a great start. Now, people say, Doc, but I just have mentally, I got to get this stuff under control. I agree. I totally agree. Remember, you are speaking and listening to the #1 sugar addict in the world. I would rather have a huge plate of potatoes than actually any good food on the planet. Now, I'm saying my potatoes are organic, but I love that. You know, I can eat it for breakfast. All right? But here's what happens. So I understand the drive for it. I understand here, there's only one way. There's only one way to reduce a sugar craving, to get rid of sugar cravings. Does anybody know? Now, Jason, our newest guy here, there's only one way that you can get rid of sugar cravings, and that's to die. That's to die. This concept, people say, they think they can take this and this actually will get rid of all your sugar cravings. That's just a lie. That's just propaganda and they're trying to sell you something. That's just a lie. Okay? Now, but you can do things that can reduce your absorption of sugar. Why? Because you have an open tube from mouth to rectum. You do. Actually, it's open. It needs to pass through. There's certain receptors, just like those cell membrane receptors, that attach onto it and bring our sugars in. So therefore, guess what? That's why you ever look at, if you've ever seen a picture of me with my supplements, this supplement has been taken by me forever. Because I already knew I was a sugar addict. Once again, my form of sugar was, potatoes, rice, and fruit. So I want to reduce the absorption of that. So that's why I absolutely love Gymnema. Gymnema. It's a good way to how to regulate your absorption. Now watch, the most medical website in the world, WebMD. If you type in Gymnema in WebMD, this will pop up. I mean, the name stands for destroyer of sugar. But here's the cool part I love about it. Gymnema contains substances that decrease the absorption of sugar from the intestine. Think about that. That's the only part I'm going to talk about today, but you read the rest, it'll kind of blow your mind away. But what it does, it reduces the absorption of sugar. That means when you put it on and you take it in a liquid form, and you put it in your mouth and you swallow it, all of the receptors from mouth to rectum start to actually bind to the constituents from Gymnema, so you can't absorb as much sugar. See, the first key to actually all the things that you want to happen, and the majority of people stop sugar for one purpose, weight loss. Weight loss, okay, is you need to stop the absorption process, so therefore you need to change those things. You have to make sure that you have a good fatty acid-based coating. You got to make sure that you actually have good microfloras. You got to make sure that your stomach's good. You got to make sure that whole process is good all the way through. But then you can actually add things in that will do even more. That's why, once again, that's why even though I would eat a ton of potatoes and rice, things like that, my blood sugar still tasted great. Because why? I just had too much. And that was the cool thing about when I started to do no sugar 50 some days ago. Yes, most people are on day 4. I'm on day 50 some. I think it's 55 or 56, somewhere in there. Okay? Because why? I wanted to decrease the absorption of my sugars, so I just cut them all out. Now, you say, Doc, but you need sugar. You're right. I'm just eating forms of polysaccharides. I'm eating carbohydrates, which are sugars. Now, once again, they say, well, greens aren't listed as sugars. Yes, they are. They're just longer form sugars. And the reason why they don't call them sugars, they call them carbohydrates in good and bad, is because some they classify as sugar and others they classify as carbohydrates. There's no difference. Let me say it again. There is no such thing as good and bad carbs. None. There is no such thing as good and bad estrogens. The same misconceptions happen in both. So let me ask you a question then, as I did from the beginning. Okay, I want to show you there. Is sugar bad for you? The only thing bad about sugar is most people have no clue about it. That's it. Do you understand? Is red meat bad for you? The only thing bad about red meat is most people have no idea about it. Are vaccines good for you? The only bad thing is they don't know about them, so they don't know what to do. See, you got to understand that everything that we have in our healthcare system is not meant to give you a different perspective. It's actually to say you have no perspective. It's actually say, trust me, I'm a doctor. Anybody that says that, run. Because you know why? Because if you just understand the basics of immunology and biochemistry and all the things that I teach you guys every Saturday, this stuff makes complete sense. And when you read an article, you can sit there and go, hey, guess what? There's no such thing as bad estrogens. And they should lose their credibility because they're misleading people. Guys, there's no such thing as good and bad carbs. If you hear that, guess what happens? They have no idea about the basic biochemistry of just sugars alone. So on our page, I mean this nicely, stop arguing on that page. Do you know why? There's nothing to argue about. It's hard to argue about something you know very little about. I watch people argue all the time about politics, about healthcare, about vaccines, and everything like that. And instead of becoming informed, you argue based on past trainings. You argue because a doctor said. You argue because your grandma said. This literally happened when I was explaining vaccines to somebody on Thursday. They said, well, my mom would only get tetanus and polio vaccine. The rest she doesn't believe in. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. Clostridium tetani, where does it come from? Let me ask you a question, guys. Where does Clostridium tetani come from? Any idea? It's a normal flora in horse and cows. So therefore, from their poop, there's actually Clostridium tetani. Actually, even sometimes in raw milk. So therefore, when you get cut by a nail or you get cut by a piece of metal and you run to the hospital and they say, you need a tetanus shot, your first question should be, Doc, there was no, or the first question is to be, or response should be, Doc, there was no horse feces or cow feces on the metal. Why would I need a tetanus shot? Well, because, no, why? And you're going to find out. This happens all the time because the people that I teach about this end up in sometimes an emergency. And they'll say, you need a tetanus shot. Well, unless there was cow or horse feces on there, there is no clinical evidence or even validity, and actually it should be malpractice to give one. See, stop listening. Stop listening, start learning so you can think differently, because then your actions will be so much differently. So once again, if you don't understand something, learn. If you don't understand something, get informed. Because if you don't, I watch good people on the page. Thank you so much for being on the No Sugar January page. But please don't argue with somebody, especially just people trying to do something right. Do you see what I'm saying? If somebody asks a question and people say, Doc, you said you could have this. Yes. Because my job, especially in something so general like that, is I have to generalize to everybody. Do you understand being a speaker? It's so sometimes difficult because people want the minor details of take this, and you see all the natural and medical people do that too. Take this herb and it does everything for every disease. See what I'm saying? Here, this herb is good for GI problems. Okay, what kind of GI problems? And why is it that 50 people took it and 2 people said it was good? It doesn't mean it hurt the other 48 people. It's just that there's no 2 people that are sane. So as I said before, is sugar bad for you? No, it's essential for life. But the bad part is, the part that's bad, is we have a very, very different perspective on it than what should happen. It's why I always told you guys this is called a different perspective. Because here's what happens. There's not one thing I told you that you can't go look up. It's just that when I see people talk about things that they don't know about. It's frustrating. So therefore, use these next 3 weeks, and I'm going to go into detail of those foods. Yeah, it's really funny. I didn't talk about processed stuff. I didn't. Because you know why? Give you a little idea. All processed stuff does is make it more readily available. That's all it does. It's like, what does cooking do to food? Actually pre-digest it. You lose some nutrients, there's no doubt. But see that people freak out and say, you gotta be all raw, you gotta cook. Man, let me tell you, it's different for everybody. So on that note, continue. Be with me next week. Do me a favor, like and share this. For you guys that like and share this, you'll actually be put in a drawing for tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, Christy and I will be doing our bedroom discussion at 9 p.m. Central, and we are taking a drawing and we're giving away 2 actually food allergy tests. So for you guys that are on live, you automatically get in. So all of you guys, thank you. For all you guys that are live, thank you for getting in. Okay? Now, if you share it, you will go in the drawing. And for you guys that are on the no sugar page, once again, if you share this, you go in there twice. Because once again, you've participated so far in the challenge for 4 days. Thank you for continuing to post. Thank you for sharing your experience. So what you need to do on our No Sugar January page, instead of arguing somebody's point, just sit back and listen. Our doctors will respond to people. They know what they're talking about. So the cool thing is this, as you do, sit back and learn, because your life will be better. What's my purpose of doing these videos? For your life to be better. Because you know why? I'm going to end on something that I read, no joke, at 4 in the morning that kind of should make not only you sad, but everybody sad across the world. We talked about blood sugar. If this is not done right, it doesn't matter who pays for it. What do I mean? So here's what happens. New stats just came out for England and Wales. And say, Doc, how can they track these stats better in the United States? Because they have a socialized medicine process. So guess what happens? They know when they get a diagnosis and the government pays for their stuff that way, they keep a track in the budget. Get this, the cost of diabetes, and let's not say blood sugar problem, let's say the understanding of blood sugar. Diabetes, metabolic syndrome, all those things are not a sugar problem. It's an understanding of sugar problem. It's a different perspective. Guess what? Is now 10% of the NHS budget for England and Wales. 10% of the full government budget. And you're gonna watch over the next 8 months, people get up and debate and say, I think everybody should have government-based health care. No, I don't. I think, for example, people have to have a different perspective so they don't need to spend 10% of their full government budget on one condition. Think about that. I don't care. I don't want to hear about your grandma that doesn't have health care. I want to talk to your grandma that didn't take care of herself and has the need for health care. See, we need to, why did I ask you to share this? Because if you don't share it, no one else is going to. If you don't, for example, get information out there, what did I teach you guys? How to eat something differently, how to look at perspectively differently. And then you can do things to set yourselves up for better success. I take Jim Nemo. Why? Because I was sassy with my sugars. They kept things pretty darn good. But then I said, I'm going to pull out the major forms of simple sugars, and that's what that list is. And that's why some sugars are on there and some are not. We tried to pull out the most absorbable sugars. So therefore, guess what? And I dropped 20 pounds so far. Was I trying to lose 20 pounds? Nope. I was just enjoying the process. But think about this. 10% of their government budget goes for the misunderstanding of sugars. Join me for the next 2 weekends. And I'm going to teach you more in detail so then you will know what to do at your house so you're not spending 10% eventually of your own income on these kind of things. My name is Dr. Patrick Flynn. Thank you so much for watching me today. Thank you guys for all watching. Please like and share. Join me next week to continue on a lot more detail of this perspective. God bless you. Have a great day. Hey, thank you for watching. make sure to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a single video or live stream. Also, share this video with a friend. Once again, thank you for watching.